On June 14th, 2026, the Octagon wasn't in Vegas. It wasn't in Abu Dhabi. It was on the south lawn of the White House, 40 feet from the Oval Office, under a roughly 90-foot steel structure, everybody nicknamed the Claw. 7 fights, 2 title bouts, a sitting president watching cage side on his 80th birthday, next to Dana White, while the Blue Angels buzzed the roof, and a country singer belted the national anthem into a crowd chanting USA. And somewhere in the commentary booth was the guy who, 3 weeks earlier, told his own podcast audience he didn't like this idea, that it was odd, that fighting outdoors in DC humidity for a world title sounded insane. Joe Rogan, the single most powerful voice in combat sports, spent a month publicly unsure if this was a good idea.
There's going to be a UFC on the White House lawn.
Yeah.
That seems like a good, safe place to be, huh? Everyone's going to know where all the world leaders are going to be. We're all going to be stuck sitting in that spot for 6 hours calling fights.
You're going to be there, right?
Super safe. I feel completely safe.
You're going to be there, right?
Yeah. Oh, I'm going to be there.
Do you like the concept of it or no?
I do not like it.
How come, guy?
Because it's outside, and I think world championship fights should be in a controlled environment. Because out of respect for the athletes and how difficult it is to compete professionally in a world title.
And then sat there and called it, and I quote him loosely here, the greatest night in the history of the sport.
Masterpiece.
Yes, sir.
It was beautiful to be there. I felt so
American.
American.
Hey.
I felt so
It's so hard to represent this country because we're such a melting pot.
Yes.
And I think I have done it. I think I achieved that. And so I'm very, very proud of that.
Dude, you did it in spades. You did it 5 stars. It was phenomenal. It was one of the greatest events that any sporting event has ever put on. I mean, maybe the greatest sporting event in the history of the world.
This video isn't about whether that's good politics or bad politics. I'm not touching that. What I want to talk about is what it means, culturally, that this happened at all. That the exact ecosystem of podcasts, cage fights, and guys yelling about leg kicks now has an actual official load-bearing slot in the architecture of the American presidency. Because if you wanted one image, one single frame to explain how we got here, you wouldn't pick a tweet or a clip. You'd pick a cage on the White House lawn with Joe Rogan holding the microphone. Let's get into it. Rewind to July 3rd, 2025. Trump's at a rally in Iowa and just kind of announces it, off the cuff. We're doing a UFC fight on the White House grounds. We've got a lot of land there.
We're going to have a UFC fight. Think of this on the grounds of the White House. We have a lot of land there. We're going to build a little...
Dana White confirms it a month later. This wasn't a bit. It was a real government-backed event with a dedicated task force and budget. The original pitch was July 4th, tied to America's 250th birthday. It got moved to June 14th instead, which, and outlets did not let this slide, happens to be Trump's own 80th birthday. So what started as a patriotic anniversary event quietly became a birthday party with a fight card attached, and the branding just kind of absorbed both. They called it Freedom 250. Nobody really argued about the name because everyone was too busy arguing about everything else. And everything else was a lot. A watchdog group sued to try to block it, arguing you can't just hand over federal parkland to a for-profit sports promotion without congressional sign-off, and pointed out that Trump had personally bought stock in the UFC's parent company a few months before the event was locked in. A judge let the fight go on anyway. Construction crews spent weeks tearing up the South Lawn to build a $60 million temporary arena. The press conference was at the Lincoln Memorial with weigh-ins at the Ellipse, because apparently that tracked now. Here's the thing. This wasn't a watered-down exhibition. This was a real card. Ilia Topuria, the undefeated lightweight champ, defending against Justin Gaethje in a unification bout. Alex Pereira and Cyril Gane fighting for an interim heavyweight belt. Sean O'Malley, Bo Nickel, Diego Lopez. Real fighters, real titles, real risk. And then the sport did what the sport does. It refused to follow the script. Gaethje, the underdog, finished Topuria and walked out with the belt. Josh Hokett, a late add to the card at Trump's personal request over a different fighter he liked, TKO'd that other guy, Derek Lewis, instead. Every single fight on the card that night ended in a knockout. Every one. That had literally never happened in the sport's history. Not once. In any UFC event ever. Meanwhile, the actual staging was somewhere between state dinner and monster truck rally. Marine band playing entrance music. Zac Brown band on the anthem. Blue Angels and Thunderbirds doing a flyover mid-ceremony. Around 4,300 people in the seats, at least 1,200 of them active duty military, plus a scattering of tech and media CEOs. And, this is a detail worth sitting with, the fights happened on the same day the US and Iran reached a deal to end their conflict. So the backdrop to cage fight on the White House lawn was, quite literally, the end of a war. Hours earlier, same news cycle. If you tried to pitch this as a movie, somebody in the room would say it's too on the nose. Now let's talk about the guy in the middle of all of it, because Rogan's reaction to this event, start to finish, might be the single cleanest case study in the Rogansphere you're ever going to get. In late May, weeks out, Rogan tells his own podcast audience, the White House thing is odd. He doesn't like it. He doesn't think you should run a world title fight in an uncontrolled outdoor environment. And he'd apparently looked up the actual weather history for June 14th in D.C. and didn't love what he found.
The White House thing is odd. I don't like it. I don't like the idea of fighting outside at all.
Well, there's problems with it.
And then
done it too many
it's
times.
June,
Yeah.
and it's D.C., and we looked it up. The last time, like last year, same day, it was 100 degrees.
Yeah. Oh,
That's
Yeah.
hot. I just don't think that you should compete in a world championship fight in a non-controlled environment.
Yeah.
I think it should be inside an air-conditioned arena. It should be a controlled environment.
A little later, talking with a guest, he called the whole concept a gimmick and said, only half joking, that he'd be there unless a bomb went off first.
So you're going to be at that one?
Yeah, I'm going to
Okay.
be there, allegedly.
Allegedly?
If there's not a goes off between now and then. Who fucking knows? This world is crazy.
I love what you did with the Ibogaine with it, man.
Thank you.
Way to go.
He was also visibly uneasy about the timing, an outdoor event at the White House while the U.S. was actively in a shooting war with Iran. That's the skeptic. Here's the hype man, same guy, 3 weeks later. The second the last fight ended, Rogan got on the mic and told the Paramount broadcast this was the greatest night in the history of combat sports. Full stop, nothing else close. On his own podcast, days after, he called it the wildest experience of his entire 20-plus year broadcasting career. He compared it to the Rumble in the jungle. At one point, he floated that it might be the greatest sporting event ever staged in the history of the world, and then to his credit, immediately clocked himself, admitting on air that he's just a hyperbolic guy by nature, always saying something is the greatest thing ever.
I'm a hyperbolic individual, and I'm always like, this is the greatest, this is awesome. Like, that was the wildest experience that I've ever had in my 20-whatever years of calling combat sports. There's nothing even close. Nothing even close. It was the greatest night of fights of all time. And it was the only night in the history of the sport where every single fight ended by a knockout.
Did they all?
Every single one.
didn't make it
7
to the
fights. 7 fights. Every one of them ended by knockout,
Wow.
which never
Which is
happens.
unprecedented.
Unprecedented.
Wow.
It was like the perfect experience for anybody that had never watched the UFC before to see it that way at the White House like that. I mean, it was nuts. A huge experience for the fans.
That self-awareness is kind of the whole point. He knows he does this. He does it anyway. And backstage, apparently, there was a moment where Rogan turned to Trump and made a dark joke about the possibility of a terrorist attack at the event, which, according to Dana White, was a real enough concern that security treated it seriously. Trump's response, by Rogan's own retelling later on his show, was blunt enough that it stopped Rogan cold for a second. That's not a normal exchange to have backstage at a sporting event. That's a normal exchange to have backstage at this sporting event.
I said to Trump, I go, I hope we don't die in a terrorist attack.
Dude.
I said to Trump, I hope we don't die in a terrorist attack. He goes, we got to go somehow. I
That's
go,
what I
what
mean.
the
Yeah, like everyone will remember it for the rest of eternity.
but no, I'll pass.
Sign me up,
I'll
bud.
pass.
better the way it went.
Dude,
I think
the
it
way it went is way better.
fantastic.
That's a way better outcome.
Way better.
Not everything about the night stayed in the wow, incredible spectacle lane, though. After his win, Josh Hokett, the fighter Trump personally requested, used his post-fight interview, standing right next to Rogan, to make a crude comment about Michelle Obama on live television from the White House lawn. Rogan didn't say anything in the moment, just moved the interview along. Dana White condemned the comment afterward, calling it flat out nasty, and said he's against that kind of talk about anyone's family, regardless of how anyone feels about free speech. Rogan, on his own show, days later, basically said the UFC should have seen it coming, that Hokett's got a built-in loudmouth persona, a pro wrestling heel character he plays, and that putting a guy with that shtick on a live mic at the White House was maybe not the move. He didn't disown Hokett, he disowned the placement.
And when you are standing in the octagon of a UFC fight on the White House lawn and you're asked if you have anything to say and you scream, Michelle Obama's a man, that is the clock has struck midnight. That's that. I mean, I don't know what else you could do.
That guy, Josh Hokett,
Yeah.
you know, that's like he's got a shtick. Like he's got a character. That he does.
Fun.
The Incredible Hulk. And so he's basically like a pro wrestling bad guy who also is a really good fighter.
Right.
So there's a real problem there.
What
this
should
guy
have
keeps
happened?
winning.
Yeah, and he says crazy stuff.
Well, they probably, in retrospect, if they wanted to avoid this, probably shouldn't have had him fight on the White House lawn.
Sure.
Because if he said that at the T-Mobile Arena or in Madison Square Garden,
Totally.
outrageous.
Sure.
But not that big a deal.
And then there was the online fallout, with critics calling the whole event a partisan spectacle, and Rogan, notably, didn't take that quietly. He told his audience pretty bluntly to knock it off, that showing up to call a fight doesn't mean you're endorsing anyone's foreign policy, and that people on both sides were being egotistical about turning a fight card into a referendum on who's a good person. He wasn't exactly neutral there.
That's something you have to see and experience.
Yeah.
And so many people are trying to make it a partisan thing, like they're mad at people for being there, like, oh, you support Trump. Like it's a fight at the White House. Doesn't mean you endorse foreign policy. Like shut the up. Just
That's
please.
too much.
Just please stop. And again, it's this thing, the ego thing, where people are they just want so badly. And on both sides, for sure. You know, the right celebrates this as a win for masculinity and patriotism and all these different things. Like, okay, settle down. Everybody settle down.
Yeah.
We should all be together.
But notice what he was defending. Not a policy position, just the right for a UFC commentary gig to be a UFC commentary gig. So step back for a second. What do I even mean when I say Rogansphere? I mean the whole orbit, Rogan's podcast, the UFC, the comedians who show up as ringside guests, the fighters who become podcast regulars, the aesthetic of long, unedited conversations, a general distrust of legacy media, and a deep, genuine love of watching something huge and slightly chaotic unfold live. It's not a political ideology, it's a vibe, and it's one of the biggest vibes in American media. This world used to be the outsider's table. UFC spent its first decade banned in multiple states, described by an actual U.S. senator as human cockfighting, unable to get on cable. Rogan spent years as the weird guy who did psychedelics on his podcast and had cage fighters and conspiracy theorists on back to back. That was the pitch. We're not the mainstream. We don't need the mainstream. Come sit with us instead. And now the outsider's table is on the South Lawn, under a flyover, next to the Oval Office, with a sitting president in a front row seat for his birthday, and the same guy who used to be the fringe alternative to network television, now serving as the MC of an actual White House production. That's the whole thesis, in one image. It's not that the UFC went legit. It's been legit for years. It's that the entire Rogan-adjacent media apparatus, the skepticism, the hyperbole, the outsider posture, all of it got fully absorbed into the machinery of official American spectacle, and it did it so smoothly that the guy running commentary was doubting the idea and hyping the idea in the same month, on the same show, and nobody even blinked. A cage fight ends every bout by knockout on the same day, a war ends, on the president's birthday, with a slur controversy, a foiled terror threat, and a commentator calling it the greatest thing he's ever seen. all before June was even over. You can't script that. You can only watch it happen and try to figure out what it says about where the culture actually is right now. If that's not peak Rogansphere, I genuinely don't know what is. If you think I've got this wrong, if you were watching live and it felt like something else to you, tell me in the comments. I actually read them. And if you're into this kind of thing, videos that try to actually explain the culture instead of just yelling about it, do me a favor and hit like and subscribe. It's a small channel, it genuinely helps, and it means the next one of these gets made.